Okay. Okay. Sound check. Anybody hear me? Can you hear me? All right. Audio good. Okay. So tonight, since my book has now been accepted by a academic publisher in Europe to be published, I am going to read the synopsis and annotated a table of contents. So it's a total of 5 pages, more or less, that they based their decision upon. And then the review I got back, it's not double blind. They evidently knew who I was. So it's only single blind. I don't know who he is, but it's 2 pages and it's very good. So now that there are 3 people, Pepe, Chad Chadson, Quides Veritas, I see 4, Visionary Companion. So 4 people watching. I will start. Oh, let me take my glasses off. After you turn 40, you can start reading without your glasses, but you still need them for the distance. Your eyes keep changing. But synopsis and proposal: The Years of Great Silence by J. Otto Pohl. So this is my synopsis of the book I have written. Although this proposal is for a manuscript that's completely done, so it will be published sooner than might be expected. All I have to do is send it off to the publisher as soon as I get the contract. All right. This book seeks to provide a detailed yet concise narrative of the history of the ethnic Germans in the Russian Empire and USSR. It starts with the settlement of the Russian Empire by German colonists in the Volga, Black Sea, and other regions starting in 1764. Then it traces their development and Tsarist state policies towards them up until 1917. After the Bolshevik Revolution, Soviet policy towards its ethnic Germans varied, but there is a clear shift from a generally favorable policy in the 1920s to a much more repressive one in the 1930s. The book, in fact, centers around tracing the development of this repression. In particular, it focuses on the years 1941 to 1955, during which this repression reached its height. These years are known as the Years of Great Silence, the Jahre des großen Schweigens, because until the era of Glasnost and Perestroika, the events that defined these years for the ethnic Germans in the USSR could not legally be researched, written about, or even publicly spoken about. In the fall of 1941, the NKVD forcibly deported the German population first in the Volga region, followed by those in other European areas of the USSR to Siberia and Kazakhstan. In total, almost 800,000 people suffered this fate. The Stalin regime placed the German internal deportees in eastern regions of the USSR under special settlement restrictions, greatly limiting their ability to move from place to place. The deported Germans suffered from extreme material deprivations and greatly increased premature deaths in their new places of residence during the 1940s. The Stalin regime then mobilized over 315,000 German men and women into forced labor detachments during 1942 and 1943, later known as the Labor Army. Most of the conscripts into the Labor Army worked in corrective labor camps run by the NKVD in the Urals. Labor Army inductees suffered even greater mortality rates than the deportees remaining in Kazakhstan and Siberia. the latter category growing considerably when over 200,000 Germans saved from deportation by the Wehrmacht in 1941 found themselves repatriated back to Soviet custody during 1945 to 1946. The survivors of the Labor Army were also returned to these areas of internal exile as special settlers starting at this time. The legal restrictions of the special settlement regime were finally lifted from the German population in the USSR on 13th December 1955. The 14 years between 1941 to 1955 represent the most traumatic and perhaps the most historically significant period in the over 250-year existence of the Russian Germans. The penultimate chapter of the book deals with the post-Stalin era and the attempt by various ethnic Germans in the USSR to undo the damage caused to the ethnic group by the events of the 1940s. The central argument of the book is that the mass internal deportation of ethnic Germans in the USSR in 1941 was not the result of actions by members of the group. Rather, it was due to the Soviet regime linking its own population of German ancestry to the National Socialist regime in Berlin on the basis of their Nationalnost, and was the accumulation of a series of repressive measures already taken against the group in the 1930s. The most notable being the German operation in 1937 to 1938. The treatment of ethnic German citizens of the Soviet Union could not be justified by earlier acts of collaboration by members of the group with the National Socialist occupation of the Western USSR. It thus differs from the expulsion and internment of ethnic Germans in Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia, where earlier local German activity in support of National Socialist persecution of the majority population was used as a justification for their post-war treatment. It also differs from the later Soviet internal deportations of groups like the Kalmucks, Chechens, and Crimean Tatars, who were accused of collaborating with the German occupation forces in the USSR. The Soviet deportation of its citizens of German Nationalnost instead was motivated by an assumption that their ethnic and ancestral ties to Germany made them inherently suspect of disloyalty towards the Soviet government in any conflict with the German state. Their brutal treatment at the hands of the Stalin regime in the 1940s was due to their shared ethnicity with Germany, not due to any actions by descendants of the German colonists to the Russian Empire themselves. There is little written in English on the history of the ethnic Germans in the USSR during the 1940s and 1950s. The largest amount of published material on this period of time is in Russian, with a growing amount in German. Much of what does exist in English suffers from both errors of omission and commission. For instance, the false claim made by Irina Mukhina and others that there were deliberate orders by the Soviet government to systematically separate male heads of families from women and children during the initial 1941 deportations. And then I have a footnote. Irina Mukhina, Germans of the Soviet Union, London, Routledge, 2007, pages 44 to 45. N.O. Pobal and P.M. Polian, Stalinistski deportacja, 1928 через 1953, Documenti, Moscow, 2005, pages 779, 780, provide convincing evidence the document she cites as a Nazi forgery. At any rate, does not refer to deported Germans at all. Rather, was published in a newspaper in German-occupied Latvia as a document regarding the practice of separating families during the 14th June 1941 deportation of Latvians. She claims without evidence that the procedures of the forged document must have also been applied to ethnic Germans in the USSR in September 1941. Okay, so intentional Soviet orders to remove men from their families, with the exception of some 18,600 men in eastern Ukraine, footnote number 2, and it's just a decree from the state archives of the Russian Federation. did not exist until 10th January 1942, and the mass mobilization of deported Germans into the Labor Army, which is footnote 3, which is the decree from the Russian State Archives of Social and Political History. And that's it for the footnotes, so no more. This is only one of a number of similar errors in Irina Mukhina's book, Germans of the Soviet Union, London, Routledge, 2007, which remains one of the few scholarly books on ethnic Germans in the USSR, published in English in recent decades. The book seeks to provide a more accurate and thorough narrative of the history of the ethnic Germans in the USSR than previously available in English. It relies upon state archival sources from Moscow, Bishkek, Tartu, and Washington, D.C., as well as the personal archives of Dominic Holman. In addition, it makes use of a number of interviews conducted with ethnic German survivors of the World War II era and their family members in Kant and Ivanovka, Kyrgyzstan. It also makes use of a large number of published document collections, memoirs, and secondary sources from the Russian Federation, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Germany, and other countries. There is a chapter both on the primary archival and oral sources used, as well as one reviewing the published literature and historiography on the subject in Russian, German, and English. This rich source base allows me to tell a very detailed narrative about the deportations, special settlement restrictions, and mobilization into the labor army. While the focus of this book is the 1940s, it does succinctly cover the entire history of the ethnic Germans in the Russian Empire and USSR from 1764 to 1991. Unlike many works on the group, this book seeks to move away from only focusing on their life in the European areas of the Russian Empire and later USSR. It instead covers in considerable detail their history in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan as well, even during the Tsarist and early Soviet eras before the 1941 deportations. The Asian settlements of ethnic Germans in the Russian Empire and the USSR have been especially neglected in the English language literature. This book is aimed both at those people specifically interested in the history of ethnic Germans in the Russian Empire and USSR, as well as those interested more broadly in Soviet nationality policies, diaspora groups, and ethnic repression. It could easily be adopted for classroom use in courses on ethnic cleansing, Soviet history, and even World War II. In addition to scholars, there's a large population of Germans from Russia heritage in the US, Canada, Argentina, and Germany with an interest in the history of the group. The book will be slightly over 80,000 words total and have 35 tables. I anticipate I can completely finish editing the manuscript by 1st May 2021. All right, so to answer Pepe's question, tomorrow at 5:30 p.m., early stream, because I have a guest from Texas. So we'll be discussing bio-Stalinism. All right. So now I will take some water. Я буду вода пить. And I will read the annotated table of contents, but I will skip the references to the 35 tables that are interspersed in here because that would slow down the reading and probably be very boring. So, introduction. This chapter notes that the very large forced resettlement of ethnic Germans eastward in 1941 from European areas of the USSR to Siberia and Kazakhstan have been largely neglected in English language publications. This historical neglect has several causes, but many of the technical obstacles of gathering information on the subject no longer exist. The continued paucity of research and publication in English has largely been ideological. 2. Sources. This chapter covers the primary sources used in this book, most notably the GARF, State Archives of the Russian Federation, archives in Moscow, It goes over the problems in using these archives as well as other archives from Moscow, Bishkek, Tartu, and Washington, D.C. as a source. It also deals with the collection of oral interviews in Kyrgyzstan. This chapter seeks to provide a critical overview of the limits of the primary source base, both written and oral. Literature review and historiography. This chapter is a review of the various documents, collections, monographs, and other published materials on the history of ethnic Germans in the Russian Empire and USSR in Russian, German, and English. It aims to give a critical overview of the historiography on the subject that exists in these three languages. While not exhaustive, this review seeks to note the strengths and weaknesses of the major sources from the US, Germany, Russia, and Central Asia on the history of ethnic Germans in the former USSR. Chapter 4, the origins of German settlement in the Russian Empire. This chapter is an overview of the internal settlement of German colonies in the Volga, Black Sea region, and other parts of the Russian Empire, and their development during the 18th and 19th centuries. It covers the foundation of the various colonies, their economic development, and their establishment of daughter colonies. The changes of the Russian government's policies towards the German colonists is traced from the Manifesto of 1763 up until the liquidation laws of 1915 to 1916. Chapter 5, Ethnic Germans in the Early USSR. This chapter deals with various German communities in what becomes the USSR in 1922, from 1917 to 1941. It focuses on the development of the Volga German Workers' Commune from 1918 to 1924, and the Volga German Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic from 1924 to 1941. But it also covers the various German communities in Ukraine, Crimea, the North Caucasus, the Transcaucasus, Siberia, Kazakhstan, and Central Asia. It covers collectivization, dekulakization, industrialization, and the Great Terror. The chapter tracks the movement of Soviet policy during the 1930s of increasingly targeting specific ethnic groups in the USSR, including Germans, for repression. Chapter 6, the deportation. This chapter, based mostly on Garf archives, narrates the NKVD's deportation of first the Volga and then other groups of ethnic Germans in European areas of the USSR to Siberia and Kazakhstan. It goes over the details in planning and carrying out the roundup and forced resettlement of the ethnic Germans in the Volga, Caucasus, and other western regions of the USSR eastward. The chapter compares both the archival documentation, planning, and ordering the deportation, and the later reports in the archives detailing the operations. Chapter 7, Arrival and Exile in Siberia and Kazakhstan. Also based mostly on Garf archives, this chapter details the material and legal conditions faced by German deportees sent as special settlers to Siberia and Kazakhstan in 1941. It focuses on difficulties faced by the settlers in acquiring adequate food, housing, and clothing, as well as the obsession of the NKVD commandants in keeping the internal deportees from leaving their assigned settlements. The early years after the internal deportations were marked by severe shortages and administrative chaos. Chapter 8, Fishing in the Far North. This chapter is based mostly on RGASPI archives, the Russian State Archives of Social and Political History. It deals with the second deportation northward of Germans in Siberia in 1942 and 1943 to work in the fishing industry in the Arctic Circle. Tens of thousands of ethnic German deportees in Siberia found themselves forcibly moved a second time to work in the rivers of northern Siberia to catch fish. Chapter 9, the Labor Army. This chapter is also mostly based on Garf archives. It deals with the mobilization of over 315,000 German men and women in 1942 and 1943 to work in labor columns in NKVD camps and for the People's Commissariat of Coal, Oil, and Munitions. It covers the mobilization of these men and women, the material and legal conditions they faced in the labor army, and finally their demobilization. Chapter 10, the Special Settlement Regime. This chapter starts with the legal and administrative development of the Special Settlement Regime from 1943 to 1945. It then deals with the legal and material conditions of the German special settlers after the streamlining of the legislation governing them passed on 8th January 1945. Finally, it covers the tightening of the system's restrictions after 26 November 1948. Chapter 11, Repatriated Germans. This chapter deals with the Germans with Soviet citizenship forcibly returned to Soviet control in 1945 and 1946 from areas formerly under German occupation. Ethnic Germans constituted over 200,000 of the 2 million Soviet citizens sent back to Soviet custody at the end of World War II. Their treatment was even worse than that meted out to the Germans internally deported in 1941. Chapter 12, Local Germans. This chapter deals with some 200,000 Germans already living in Siberia, Kazakhstan, Central Asia, and the Urals before 1941. Almost half of them, mainly in Kazakhstan and Central Asia, came under the special settlement restrictions after the end of World War II in 1945 and 1946. The other half, mostly in Altai Krai, Omsk Oblast, and Shakalov Oblast, remained full Soviet citizens. Chapter 13, Number of Excess Deaths, 1941 to 1948. This chapter seeks to calculate the number of excess deaths suffered by the ethnic Germans in the USSR from 1941 to 1948. It comes up with a preliminary estimate of nearly 250,000, or about 17% of the population. The estimate is rough and subject to revision due to a lack of data on the subject. Chapter 14, End of the Special Settlement Regime for Germans. This chapter deals with the dismantlement of the special settlement regime for Germans from 1954 until 13th December 1955. It details the piecemeal removal of the special settlement restrictions from Germans during these years. The release of the Germans in the USSR from the confines of the special settlement regime became finalized only a couple years after Stalin's death. Chapter 15, the post-Stalin era. This chapter deals with the life of ethnic Germans in the USSR from 1955 to 1991. In particular, it deals with issues of demography, education, and descent. On this last issue, it makes use of the personal archives of Dominic Holman and the archives of the former Supreme Court of the Estonian Soviet Socialist Republic. It concludes with the mass emigration out of the USSR by Germans to the Federal Republic of Germany. And chapter 16 is the conclusion. So now we're to the good part. There is a 2-page review of the 5 pages of proposal material I sent. And wherever the editor found this guy, we need more of him. We need to clone this guy. This is probably the best review I have ever read. And my father, who's in a different field, he's a scientist, thought so too. Usually academics are not so generous. They tend to be stingy and hostile and find problems everywhere. But this guy, good. All right. Quality. What is your overall impression of the proposal? The proposal for this book is strong and certainly makes the case for its publication. Pohl succinctly notes the lack of literature on the topic in English. This book would have cleared up many questions I had while doing my own research. While I have consulted Russian and German books that address the topic, it is always much easier to read in one's own language, and publishing in English would broaden the book to a larger scholarly audience, as well as a large audience of interested non-specialists. I am not certain of his claim that the lack of literature in English is due to ideological reasons, however. It is quite possible that this is a topic that has been overlooked by English-speaking scholars due to the difficulties of researching in Russian and German and understanding both Russian, Soviet, and German history, which I have experienced researching the topic of German prisoners of war in the Soviet Union. Often there are descendants of the Germans in Russia, the USSR, and the United States who want to know more about their family history, but do not have the language knowledge or historical training to access the necessary information. This book would also be a strong complement to the growing research on ethnic Germans in the USSR in English that is less scholarly and more so digitally based. Many of these existing studies focus on Mennonites or the fate of the ethnic Germans before the First World War. I cannot adequately underscore how unique and important this book will be. 2. How do you rate its academic rigor? Both the proposal and the chapter summary indicate that this is a well-researched and academically rigorous proposal. Pohl is qualified for this study based on his education and previous research experience. He has cited two of the most important archives in Russia, the State Archive of the Russian Federation, as well as the State Archive of Socio-Political History. The inclusion of sources from archives in Estonia and Kyrgyzstan will also provide important interventions for this topic. From my experience, not too many historians of Soviet history research much in archives in the periphery. The sources there often present fuller or different pictures than that of the central sources in Moscow. The inclusion of sources from the United States and Germany and interviews again will give much strength to the book. I also see the proper outline for a serious historical book with the literature review and explanation of the sources before the author provides his analysis of the topic. I also am familiar with an earlier work of Pohl's which I have used as a reference for my own work. Thus I am highly confident in its academic rigor. Is it original? Yes, as Pohl notes, there is only one other full-length book in English about the ethnic Germans in the USSR. The book also has a different chronological emphasis than this proposed work. There are a series of chapters within other important English language scholarly works on ethnicity in the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union vis-a-vis Germans, but those again focus on the fate of the Germans around the First World War. They sometimes mention additional repression and forced migration of Germans to Siberia or Central Asia around the time of the Second World War, but have very little detail. Pohl is correct to note that this topic is one that could not be studied until the end of the Soviet Union, and if its researcher's experience is similar to my own on prisoners of war, many documents were not declassified until even 5 or 10 years ago. What comments can you make on the structure of the proposed book? I think the structure of the book is strong and logical. My only question is whether or not it is necessary to have separate chapters for sources as well as the literature review and historiography. Depending on the length of those sections, they could probably be subsections of the introduction. Does it engage thoroughly with the relevant material? Based on the level of detail from the proposal and chapter summary, yes. I recognize the one book on the topic in English that was cited, and I have little doubt that the author will engage with the relevant literature in German and Russian in the corresponding sections on literature review and historiography, as well as have discussions with those sources interwoven throughout pertinent sections in other chapters. Are the title and subtitle appropriate? The title is fitting and appropriate. There is currently no subtitle listed, and the author might want to succinctly use one to explain the years of great silence for a larger readership. Perhaps he should include a subtitle along the line, Ethnic Germans in the USSR, 1941 to 1955. Potential market. Is the book well tailored to the needs and expectations of its target readership? Yes, it is shaped for a scholarly audience and engages directly with other similar works written about the topic in a series of different languages. The book is also laid out in a fashion that should be accessible to the non-specialist audience as well, provided the full text of the book matches the writing style of the proposal and table of contents. It will contain enough detail for specialists while avoiding too much jargon or complex writing styles that would deter casual but interested readers. What, if any, book compete with this title? How would the proposed book differ? There are not any books that directly compete with the proposed book. This is a much needed book for the field, especially in English. The book would be unique in terms of its source base and scope. Would you use this book in your own teaching or research? Yes, with a big explanation point. This book would have been very useful for my earlier research and will certainly be useful for my work going forward. I would also use the book for courses on ethnicity in the USSR or the Second World War. Any other comments? This is a stellar topic and will fill many historical gaps for an English language audience. Please publish this book. All right. It's not available for purchase yet because it hasn't been published yet. It's just been approved to be published. So when it comes out, which may be a while, I will let everybody know. But right now, I've just gotten it accepted. So they are sending me a contract from Europe, and I will proceed from there to provide them with the full manuscript. All right, so that was all I had for the stream tonight. I'll have a stream tomorrow early, 5:30 p.m. my time, because I have a guest. We'll be discussing bio-Stalinism, and hopefully that will go well. And then the week after that, on Sunday, I will have Don the Pleb on Sunday afternoon. So it will be 11 a.m. my time and 1 p.m. his time to discuss Stalinism as well. So we'll have a whole month or so devoted to the General Secretary himself. In the meantime, until I see everybody tomorrow, thanks for showing up, and I will catch you all later. All right. Let me get out of here.